How did a pirate, condemned to death by the Spanish crown, become a knight of the British Empire? How did a man who began his career as a slave trader transform into a national hero, whom the Queen affectionately called, "My dear pirate"? This is not a story of nobility. It's a tale of money, power, and state-sponsored racketeering disguised as grand geographical discoveries. The 16th century, Spain ruled the world. Its gold-laden convoys packed with Inca and Aztec treasures crossed the Atlantic, making Madrid the wealthiest capital on earth. And England? A Protestant island isolated from the Catholic world. A poor country with a young Queen Elizabeth I desperately seeking a way to survive amidst her enemies. She had no funds for an army, nor a navy capable of challenging the Spanish Armada. Direct war would be suicide, and Elizabeth understood this perfectly. Therefore, a different approach was necessary, one that defied the rules. Someone audacious, ruthless, and utterly invisible to mainstream politics was needed. A person who could strike a blow, while the palace feigned ignorance, and such a man was found. The son of a simple farmer from Devon, who harbored a fierce hatred for the Spanish and dreamed of immense wealth. His name was Francis Drake. He was more than just a sea rogue, he was the crown's secret weapon. But this hatred for Spain wasn't born on a ship's deck. It was forged in dirt and fear. His father was a Protestant farmer, forced to flee persecution under the Catholic Queen Mary I. Young Francis witnessed his family being stripped of their home, hounded for their faith. He grew up with a profound sense of injustice. The powerful and wealthy could break any promise and destroy your life simply because they could. It was a lesson he never forgot. As an adult, he went to sea with his cousin, John Hawkins. They engaged in a terrible yet lucrative business, human trafficking, transporting slaves from Africa to Spanish colonies. It was dirty work, but it brought money. For a while, Drake believed he had found a way to make something of himself, until 1568. A storm caught their small fleet, forcing them to seek repairs in the Mexican port of San Juan de Ulua, right into the lion's den of the Spanish. The Spanish viceroy guaranteed their safety, swearing that the English would be unharmed. Drake and Hawkins believed him. But the following night, the Spanish attacked. Suddenly and mercilessly. Out of 6 English ships, only 2 escaped. Hundreds of sailors were killed, all gold and goods seized. Drake miraculously survived, having lost everything he owned. In that moment, he understood. Rules exist only for the weak. A word of honor, treaties, laws, all were dust when true power was at stake. He vowed to take everything from Spain down to the last gold peso, and he had no intention of playing by rules that no longer existed for him. But to break the rules, a loophole was needed, and in the 16th century such a loophole existed, the size of an entire ocean. The sea was a no-man's land, a zone where the laws of great empires were ineffective, but the law of the strong reigned supreme. Smart rulers learned to exploit this. Thus, privateering emerged, essentially legalized state-sponsored racketeering. The scheme was brilliantly simple. The crown issued a private captain a special document, a letter of marque. This paper authorized him to plunder the ships of enemy powers. De jure, he was not a pirate, but a private military contractor. All spoils were divided. A substantial portion went to the treasury, the rest to the captain, crew, and those who invested in the expedition. If a privateer was caught, the government would feign innocence. We know nothing. It was his personal initiative. Was the ideal war for the poor, undeclared, without armies, and most importantly, immensely profitable. Spain itself created the perfect target for this scheme. Every year, its silver fleet transported the treasures of the New World across the Atlantic. It was the largest and slowest cash cow in history. Dozens of ships, laden with gold, silver, and jewels, crawled toward the shores of Europe, vulnerable, predictable, and fabulously rich. And all of this was spiced with religious hatred. For Protestant England, every blow against Catholic Spain was not just plunder, but a righteous cause. Every captured Spanish galleon was a nail in the coffin of papal tyranny and Spanish arrogance. The thirst for money, political intrigue, and fanatical faith merged into one perfect storm. This was an era when patriotism easily became piracy and robbery a profitable state project. The world was ready for Drake. It just didn't know what awaited it. and he began his war. In 1572, with just 2 ships and 73 men, Drake attacked Nombre de Dios, a key Spanish port in Panama through which Peruvian silver flowed. A night assault, panic, the English burst into the treasury. And then Drake was severely wounded. The crew, seeing their captain bleeding, retreated, abandoning mountains of ingots. A failure? For anyone else, yes, but not for Drake. He understood. Attacking a fortress head-on was foolish. He needed to strike at the arteries. He formed an alliance with the Cimarrones, escaped slaves who knew the jungles like the back of their hand and hated the Spanish no less than he did. Together they ambushed a mule caravan carrying silver from Panama to the port. At night, in complete silence, they fell upon the guards. It wasn't a battle, it was a massacre. The loot was so enormous that they couldn't carry it all. Some of the gold had to be buried in the jungle. Drake returned to England a fabulously wealthy man. But this was just the beginning. His next operation changed the world. With the Queen's secret blessing, in 1577, Drake embarked on an expedition officially aimed at discovering new lands. The true goal was to enter the Pacific Ocean, which the Spanish considered their private lake, and strike where no one expected it. After enduring the hell of the Strait of Magellan, he lost all his ships except his flagship, the Golden Hind. Left alone, he began his hunt. Along the coasts of Chile and Peru, he plundered port after port, terrorizing colonies that hadn't seen enemy ships in decades. From prisoners, he learned of his main target, the galleon Cacafuego, laden with a year's mining revenue, sailing from Peru to Panama. Drake gave chase. To avoid alarming the Spanish, he ordered barrels to be dragged behind his stern, slowing his ship and disguising it as an unwieldy merchant. The Spanish captain, seeing the slow vessel, didn't even consider danger. He approached closer and fell into a trap. A single broadside shattered his mast. Drake's crew boarded the galleon without a single shot. In the holds, they found 26 tons of silver, 80 pounds of gold, and 13 chests of jewels. This bounty was enough to cover England's entire annual budget. 1 ship, 1 captain, and the Spanish Empire received a slap from which it would never recover. But it wasn't about luck or a favorable wind. Drake was a genius not so much of navigation as of psychology. He didn't just hire a crew, he sold them a dream of such wealth that it would erase their past and buy them a future. His expeditions were, in essence, 16th century startups, and the shareholders included everyone, from the Queen and her ministers who invested secret capital to the youngest cabin boy who risked his life for his share. He promised not just money, he promised to change their destiny, and people followed him into the very inferno. Moreover, on board, he created a true theater of power. While his sailors ate salted meat, Drake dined with his officers at a table set with silver plate to the sound of a violin. This was not mere eccentricity, it was a demonstration. He showed everyone, we are not pathetic brigands. We are gentlemen of fortune who already live as if the treasures of Spain are in our pockets. This confidence was infectious. It transformed a band of cutthroats into a disciplined crew, believing in their captain as if he were a prophet. But behind this facade lay an iron will. Drake tolerated no disobedience, none whatsoever. During his circumnavigation, his close friend, the aristocrat Thomas Doughty, questioned his leadership and attempted to incite a mutiny. Drake held a show trial right on the wild coast of Patagonia, and coldly had him beheaded. The message was clear to all. In this enterprise there was only one boss, and his word was law, standing above friendship, rank, and origin. He created a perfect machine for plunder, motivated by greed, blinded by charisma, and bound by fear. But this machine didn't operate in a vacuum. Behind Drake stood the most powerful people in England, and his chief patron was Sir Francis Walsingham, the Queen's spy master. A true grey eminence who saw Drake not just as a plunderer, but as an ideal instrument for waging a secret war. It was he and his circle, influential courtiers, merchants, admirals, who were the shareholders investing in the expeditions. They risked everything. If Drake were caught and their connection to him exposed, it would not just be financial ruin, but a charge of treason. However, there was another faction led by Lord Burghley, the Queen's Lord High Treasurer. A cautious and pragmatic politician, he believed Drake was a disaster that would drag England into a war with Spain, a war it could not win. To him, Drake was not a hero, but a pyromaniac with a torch near Europe's powder keg. And Burghley's main ally in the palace was the Spanish ambassador, Don Bernardino de Mendoza. He would literally burst into audiences with the Queen, brandishing spy reports and demanding one thing, that Drake be hanged like a common thief. Elizabeth found herself at the center of this storm. She masterfully played a double game. Publicly, she assured Mendoza that she condemned piracy and that if Drake returned, he would face trial. But in private conversations with Walsingham, she approved new raids. Drake was her unofficial fist, with which she could strike Spain, always leaving herself the option to say, "It wasn't me." Everything changed in the autumn of 1580, when the Golden Hind secretly entered Plymouth Sound. The treasures of the Cacafuego were so immense they could not be hidden. The expedition's investors received a profit of 4,700%. The Crown's share doubled the annual income of the entire kingdom. Walsingham's secret war against Spain had suddenly brought very real, tangible tons of gold and silver. Now the Queen had to choose: declare her pirate a criminal and return the money, preserving a fragile peace, or acknowledge him as a hero and openly defy the most powerful empire in the world. The Spanish ambassador Mendoza was beside himself with rage. He wasn't asking, he was demanding. Drake's head on the block and every last peso of gold returned to King Philip's treasury. Lord Burghley and his party of cautious politicians told the Queen the same thing: Drake was a disaster. Surrender the treasures, apologize, sacrifice the pirate, and pray that Spain would be satisfied. This was the voice of reason, the voice of fear before an inevitable war that England could not afford. But Francis Walsingham had a different plan. He saw this gold not as a problem, but as a solution. It wasn't just money, it was the foundation for a new fleet. It was an opportunity to hire an army. It was a chance to stop being a poor, feared island once and for all, and become a power that everyone respected. He convinced Elizabeth. Giving back the gold now meant showing weakness and inviting the enemy to invade tomorrow. Elizabeth listened to everyone, but the decision had already formed in her mind. It was a pure, cold calculation. To return the gold meant not only losing a colossal fortune, but also admitting that Drake was a criminal, and therefore so was she, his patron. It would be political suicide, and she made her move, a move that shook all of Europe. On April 4th, 1581, she staged a magnificent spectacle, not in the throne room, but right on the deck of the Golden Hind, the ship that had become the symbol of her secret war. She invited the entire court and, as a special humiliation, the Spanish ambassador. Then, before everyone's eyes, she handed Mendoza a gilded sword and offered him the honor of personally knighting Drake. The ambassador refused with disgust. So the Queen took the sword herself. She touched her pirate's shoulder with it and declared, "Arise, Sir Francis Drake." In that moment, the game was over. A private adventure became official state policy. Plunder was legalized at the highest level, and Francis Drake, from a wanted criminal, transformed into a living symbol of defiant England. It was a spit in the face of the Spanish king, and Spain could no longer tolerate that insult. King Philip II of Spain immediately took action. He gave orders to build a fleet such as the world had never seen, the Invincible Armada. Hundreds of ships, thousands of cannons, tens of thousands of soldiers, all intended to wipe Protestant England off the face of the earth. War was no longer a question of if, it became a question of when. England responded. Drake's gold was immediately put to use. Elizabeth did not hide it in the treasury. She began to invest in the future, in new ships, in foundries that cast cannons, in shipyards that worked day and night. But most importantly, she invested in the very idea. Drake's success set a precedent. Now, every ambitious captain, every impoverished nobleman saw piracy not as a crime, but as a patriotic business project. Dozens of ships, outfitted with money from London merchants and courtiers, sailed into the ocean to follow his path. It was a gold rush, only instead of shovels, there were cannons, and instead of gold veins, there were Spanish trade routes. Drake himself also changed. He was no longer a lone wolf. Now he was an admiral of the Royal Navy and mayor of Plymouth, a man of the establishment. But his methods remained the same. In 1587, learning of the impending Spanish invasion, he carried out his most audacious raid. He burst into Cadiz, Spain's main Atlantic port, and before the astonished garrisons burned 37 Spanish ships preparing for the expedition. He didn't just destroy part of the fleet, he destroyed their logistics. He burned barrels for provisions, stocks of ropes and canvas. This operation, which he ironically called singeing the King of Spain's beard, delayed the Armada's invasion by more than a year that gave England time to prepare for the battle for its existence. The secret war ended, the open war began, and the pirate who became a knight now led England into that battle as an admiral. In the summer of 1588, the Armada arrived. It was a David and Goliath battle, and the English ships, faster, more maneuverable, led by captains like Drake, unleashed hell on the Spanish giants in the English Channel. England prevailed. The nation's hero reached the pinnacle of his glory. But what happens to heroes when the war ends? He died not in battle, not from a Spanish cannonball. Several years later, he died of dysentery off the coast of Panama, the very place where his legend had once begun. His body, in a lead coffin, was lowered into the sea, which was his only true home. And what remained? Not the gold, which had long since dissolved into the economy. A myth remained, the myth of how one man's audacity could change the fate of an entire nation. But therein lies the main paradox of Francis Drake. We remember the admiral, the knight, the savior of England, but we forget the slave trader, the ruthless killer, and the pirate whose fortune was built on blood and plunder. He was not a good man, he was a weapon, and his story is an eternal reminder that great empires are often built not by noble heroes, but by people whose personal vices perfectly aligned with state interests.